So at the studio with Kitchen Theory, we have Arthur Horwitz, founder of La Roche-Rouge Health. Arthur, welcome to the studio.
Matt, thank you very much for that, for the invite. That was amazing.
So we met after you had joined us for dinner, and we immediately started talking about food and nutrition and the relationship that has to both our, I guess, physical and our mental well-being. And it turns out that this is something that you work a lot on with your patients. And I really wanted to have that conversation with you. And after dinner at about, 10:30 at night didn't seem the right time to do it. So here we are today to discuss that a little bit more. But tell us, I guess, for people who aren't familiar with your work, what it is that you do at La Roche-Rouge Health.
So I'm an osteopath. I created this company a few months ago to really cover the whole well-being, health aspect for people, because I think nowadays what is very interesting is that we all have specialties. So as an osteopath, I deal with musculoskeletal. I'm supposed to deal with all these conditions, but I've decided to really extend my scope to really look after the diet, the exercise, and in the mental health part of my patients. So we have a very global approach, and I make sure that I can look after each of these kind of factors to make sure that at the end, everyone can enjoy their life, with their body.
And what is it that got you interested in, I guess, food and the functional aspects of what diet can provide as part of the treatment for, I guess, all different types, well, especially coming from being an osteopath? How did you get into nutrition?
So I've always been into the food since my young age. My grandparents, my grandma, my great-grandparents as well were very keen on the produce and then everything that we were eating. So I always had this cultural thing of having proper fresh food from the market on the table. Always been in the kitchen with my grandma, my mother as well. They always showed me what kind of produce I should use, what kind of produce I shouldn't use that much. And then I was all related to health, actually, because my mom always been very close to food to treat little things I had. I had an infection when I was 3 years old. And that really impacted a lot of things in my life, to be fair, but I didn't really feel it because my mom did a thing, we were in hospital and they wanted to do surgery on me. And she said, no, we're going to do a fruit diet thing for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And then this infection disappeared. And
wow.
I was 2.5. I still have some memories from that. And then I remember how all the time saying to me, you need to balance things properly because it's all about the balance. And from that, being in vegetable gardens, hands in the dirt with the vegetables and animals around, and having a bit of more sensibility to nature. So that's why when I was professional football player, I really applied all this principle to my diet. And then when I decided to stop football, obviously.
And is that common as a football player or as a sports person to? Because I think nowadays more and more people understand the importance of nutrition when it comes to professional athletes. But was that something common among your peers?
I think when I started to play, things were starting to be more consistent, I'd say, because there was a lot of different input from different sources. There was you need to have more proteins to your diet, but what kind of protein are you going to get? You have the powders, you have the natural ones, you have the supplements, you have the drinks. There was a lot of different things. So I think it was starting to be a bit more mindful about what we were eating. But I think it was great to witness that we had a very strict diet all over the place that we were eating, everywhere we were going. They were really taking care of the quality of the food that we were having.
And was that personalized, or was it kind of a general diet that the team
I think we
consumed?
When we were younger, we had a very general diet. But when you were home, and then when we were starting to be more 15, 16, 17, everything was more personalized.
Okay.
Because everyone is different. And that was great because I've never seen that in any other club so far. I was playing for Lyon, and Lyon is the capital of the gastronomy.
Yeah.
So they had to kind of,
and was that, I guess, a driving factor in it? And the fact that in Lyon there's such an appreciation for good quality food?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I found that When working in kitchens in London, I worked in quite a few French kitchens. And the big difference I always found between working in the French kitchens and, let's say, kitchens that had more British or mixed teams in them, the French teams would always stop and have a good lunch or dinner before service. And it was really important, just culturally, to kind of put your tools down, take off your apron, sit down and have a meal, come back to work, and work really hard. Whereas in a lot of the other kitchens that I worked in, it wasn't uncommon to see chefs eating a meal on the side of doing the prep, which both isn't probably that hygienic and the right thing to do, but as well just from a appreciation for that mindfulness, as you said, of taking the time to appreciate, even if it was something really basic, like just a bit of bread and butter and a bit of salad, but they would take the time to sit down and eat it and enjoy that meal period.
I think it's the singularity of like our history, or like French cuisine history. People had things available around them, you know. They didn't have supermarkets, they didn't have like any shops, so they were growing their own vegetables, their own meat. They were hunting most of the time for the meat, or they had like chickens in the farm, you know. But it was very basic, but they did so many things with it. There was a creativity that was born from fundamentals, basic things. And that became our gastronomy, and then the world discovered that. But I think it's the same in everywhere, in every country. You know, we had these foundations with very basic, simple products that were amazing, good for your health. And then history changed, obviously.
It's interesting because I have a former colleague that I used to work with at the Connaught, which was one of those French guys that I was mentioning, and he has a restaurant now in Lyon. His name is Guillaume Mallet.
Oh.
And he actually came to visit me a few months ago. And when he was telling me about his life as a chef in Lyon, it sounds idyllic. It's every chef's kind of romanticized idea. So he gets up in the morning, he goes to the market, he gets, picks what he wants, goes to his restaurant. I think they do, and I'm going to have to find out the name and give him a shout out on this, of the name of his restaurant. But basically, I think they do something between about 20 and 25 covers, and it's only him and one guy that assists him in the kitchen, and they do all the front of house service. They do obviously all the prep and the cooking. And he had come from a family of chefs, and meeting people like that, you get a real sense of, in Lyon, there is still such a rich appreciation for gastronomic tradition. And I guess it's the home of Paul Bocuse and people like that. So
Yeah.
it's got a long legacy.
Yeah, it has. I think France has. Lyon is the core, is the capital for that, because there was around Lyon, you have a lot of places where they produce wine, cheese, meat, a lot of vegetables. You have the mountains for the mushrooms, and then the dry meat as well, the nice cheese as well. And in Lyon, we call this restaurant bouchon. So there's small restaurant where people come, have like very simple like food, like tribes, a bit of like quenelle, we call, with a bit of like a crayfish sauce. Everything is quite local, and I think it's evolving, it's changing, but we still have this like very authentic place where we sit down and then the food comes. And you never wonder where the food would come from, because it's so naturally like presented, and the chefs, they really put themselves into the dish. So that was the link for me with what I'm doing. It's like trying to have a patient.
So having grown up in that culture with a real appreciation for the culinary arts. And
I grew up in South France, so my family is from Lyon, but being in South France, having access to all these nice products as well, these places where you have like this passion for cooking and good time. We have these amazing views in South France, these places where
I always remember feeling that when I first started Kitchen Theory, some of the kitchen assistant, I wouldn't even call them commie chefs, I'd say the kitchen assistants that we used to hire in for events. I ended up at one point hiring quite a few young French guys who were in England to study English. So they had no culinary background whatsoever, but they were just looking for work as students, and they could work a few hours each week. And they were brilliant in the kitchen. And the reason that they were brilliant in the kitchen is because, and I'd found this with working with a lot of the French chefs in professional kitchens, but they just grew up around an appreciation for what I would call the pleasures of the table. They might not have grown up knowing how to cook. They might not have grown up, knowingly learning about gastronomy and cooking and cuisine. But there's something culturally that just rubs off. And I'm generalizing here. I'm not saying this is everyone, but I'm just saying I happen to have had that experience of these guys just seem to understand the culinary arts in a way that I guess I found younger people, because these guys were about, let's say, 17, 18, 19, or no, they're probably more 18, 19, 20. Even though they didn't have any formal training, they just seem to have an understanding for gastronomy in a way that I'd say guys of the same age here in the UK just don't grow up with.
I think it's the education process.
Yeah.
In families, especially.
Yeah, sure.
And that's cool, because in France, you have some schools where food is not that important, and in families where, parents don't have the time.
Sure.
With the modern lifestyle, it's very different.
Yeah,
but
of course.
we have this background, like the Italian, like the Spanish, like the English in some ways. Like when I came in UK, I discovered so many amazing products.
Yeah.
In the UK, and some parts like the Peak District, for example, people said we don't really share our nice products because we're going to keep it for ourselves in a way, because we're seeing everything that is good going so big in the world. And losing its value, that we kind of keep our things sometimes. And
yeah, I've heard that a lot about different countries that have very unique and high-end but small production quantities. So you'll hear things like Lebanese wine, I hear is amazing, but I've never tried any good Lebanese wine because supposedly all the good Lebanese wine stays in Lebanon. I've also heard the same thing about South African wines. You hear the same about seafood in certain countries, that all the best stuff stays at home. Yeah. Okay, so how did we go then from being a footballer with an appreciation for nutrition, and then how did we get into healthcare?
So you have to study, obviously. So I did some part of my studies in France, finished in UK, and then became an osteopath. Worked for a private clinic for a year and something, and then opened my company after that.
Okay.
My plan was to provide this patient care that no one can provide, because we all have different type of treatments, obviously, healthcare professionals. And I wanted to go away from the standardized system, and then have a personalized approach where we look after your health, but in very, very self-explanatory way. Like, we look after your diet, we look after your movement, your sleep, your mental health, and we look after the way you're gonna use your body in the future, because the end, that's what really matters.
And how do you go about organizing these elements? So first, what kind of tests do you run? Is it dependent on, do people come to you because they're suffering maybe with a certain condition or issue? And then how is it that you go about that process of treatment? And where does nutrition kind of fall in as part of that process?
So the first time I see my patients, I want them to feel that they are listened. So I start with very open questions, and then we talk about everything. So basically, I have patients coming with some brain lesions, some rheumatoid arthritis issues, scleroderma. We have cancer patients as well. So there's a lot of people with different conditions, but at the end of the day, these conditions, they don't define them. They are human beings, And by going into these kind of details, with, like, as we said, we're going into nutrition and all of that. By exploring their habits, we find out how they eat, find out how they sleep, how they move, and then we find out how they live. So we learn a lot just by exploring habits, because food is one of the main habits of human beings, maybe the main. So by exploring all of these different aspects, I discovered, like, through my studies, that actually everything goes back to how we eat.
And why would you say, in what sense?
Because to move properly, and then to have enough energy, and to sleep well, to think well, to breathe well, to have a life that we like, we need to eat well. And that's one of the fundamentals in our
And what do you mean by eating well? Because I guess that's such a that's a question that I think frustrates a lot of people. And I say frustrates because I guess the majority of time when we think about diet and dieting, we're not talking about the more general meaning of the word diet in terms of what you consume. People tend to think about dieting as being more calorie restriction or, cutting things out or reducing, minimizing maybe your caloric intake or cutting out certain foods. And eating well is tough because there's so much misinformation out there, and it can be very hard for people to understand quite what a healthy diet may look like. And I guess that's made even more difficult by the fact that we know now that there's no one size fits all diet that's going to kind of address the needs of large populations. And so that makes it even more difficult because you think, well, where do I start? And I guess this is the kind of role where you come in and you're able to kind of guide people with this. But for the majority of people, understanding what we mean by a healthy diet is a very, very kind of frustrating question to try and answer.
Of course. The problem is, as you said, is the flow of information. It's too big, and a lot of people without the good qualification, the right qualification, the right knowledge, they would share their opinion and then provide, I think, more confusion. I think a diet is very simple. We need to be in sync with the nature. Our body, I think recently, the last 50 years, has gone away a bit from that because we have all these supermarkets setting up with products coming from everywhere in the world. Eating well does mean eating well for yourself. So everyone is different, obviously. We all have different jobs, different workout habits, different sleep habits, different everything. So my job is to really organize and simplify everything first to make sure that I have all the details for my patients, like all the different diary, I want to make sure that they know what they're doing, because most of the time people eat what they eat. They just prepare like a quick meal in the evening, something quick at lunch because they don't have the time to take a proper break to eat. And then they end up having this kind of loop starting again and again and again during the week, which end up in the weekend. And the weekend people have their cheat meals usually. So you see, it's about the balance. But I think for me, eating well is eating seasonal, trying to find as much as you can fresh products around your area, trying to work with small producers.
But how does, see, that all sounds lovely and idyllic, but how does that work when you live in a city like London or in these big cities where the only real access, I guess, that people have, and especially depending on where you live as well, right? Like, if you live South London, it's going to be very different to if you live in, let's say, North London, in terms of some of the kind of food options that you have on your local high street. So how do people go about trying to eat locally and eat seasonally when you have those kind of restrictions?
Of course. When you are in the big city, you need to think about markets.
Yeah.
Markets. But, people travel to buy a t-shirt.
Yeah.
They cross the city.
Yeah.
But people won't necessarily cross the city to buy some food.
Yeah.
But you don't need to cross the city to buy some food. I used to live in Southeast London, Bromley. We had amazing markets there. If you took a bus like for 30 minutes, you could pick up your vegetables in the field.
Okay.
I think it's more, as you said, initially, it's more about curiosity.
And it's about going out there and looking for those, places and those opportunities to buy those ingredients.
Because if you have curiosity, you have creativity. And you start imagining like what could be your future diet. As you said, we live in a city. Can't be perfect. So
I was going to say, I guess you have things like Abel and Cole as well, right? Who'll deliver farm products to your home. Maybe that's another good way of kind of eating more seasonally. And I don't know if that's locally, but definitely eating more seasonally.
Yeah, but you have some markets around West London where I live, and there's loads of markets with people like selling vegetables from Cambridge, from Oxford, from Gloucestershire. There is a lot of things. I think it's just about people trying to be more mindful about what they want to eat, and then they would discover there's actually other options. But as you said, when you are into this cycle of like inner city, you go to your Sainsbury Express or your Tesco Express, and you don't have necessarily access to good products. But even in those stuff, you can find some local British products and trying to make something with it, because It's just, as you know, cooking is just assembling few products when you start cooking and trying to have creativity. And then this gives you a lot more satisfaction than buying something that you put in your microwave and just eat.
And on that note, do you encourage your patients to cook? Is that something? Because I guess if you're looking at really giving people that kind of holistic treatment, a big part of getting their nutrition in order is going to be eating foods cooked from scratch, more whole foods, right? And including more whole foods as part of their diet. And you're never going to be able to achieve that if you're sustaining yourself from eating from supermarkets, convenience foods, pre-prepared foods. So how does that work? Because in today's day and age, people just don't cook at home, or they can't cook at home.
So what I do with my patients, I cook with them.
Ah, okay.
So my sessions are very different from a classical osteopath. I have 3 hour sessions sometimes with patients where we do the initial consultation, and then we have like the testing phase, obviously, for the movements, and then we do a little exercise, some treatment. And then I take a whole hour to really set the base with them and then start the fundamentals of cooking, because I want them to know what fat to cook with, the kind of salt they need to use, when to use the butter properly, what type of butter to use, what type of oil, because we have amazing rapeseed oil in the UK, for example. People used to cook with olive oil. I mean, they're very used to cook with olive oil, and it's a big problem nowadays because olive oil, you should never cook with it. It's full of saturated fats when you cook it. It's these kind of basics that I give to my patients the first session as well, where we cook together. I just cook them like a very simple dish they could do again, and then say to them, okay, you take this principle and then you're just trying to apply it every day, and then this will take you 10-15 minutes of your time, not more.
And what are some of the real fundamental important things that people need to be mindful of then when, if they're really unfamiliar with being in the kitchen, they want to eat healthier, they have a bit of time, maybe not loads of time, but they're completely clueless as to where to start? Because I think you just mentioned an important point that something like olive oil, I mean, it's not necessarily the right oil to be cooking with, but people have an association that olive oil is healthy. And then we're not saying that olive oil isn't healthy, but maybe it's not the right fat to use in hot cooking applications.
Healthy is a nice word. I love it, but it doesn't mean anything, because something can be healthy, but if you eat too much of it,
Sure.
becomes unhealthy. But as you said, why and how olive oil would be unhealthy just by cooking it? Obviously, all the saturated fats, all what olive oil can deliver is amazing, because even the saturated fat can be good for us in some percentage. But I think it's very important with our patients when I say to them, you need to have a good balance in your plate, because if you are vegetarian, you need to have a good protein source. Whatever it comes from, there's a lot of vegetables with a good protein source. There's a lot of good carbs with a good protein source. And there's a lot of good cheese when you're vegetarian with a good protein source, for example. So you need to have like a nice plate with a bit of everything. Food is about balance. Life is about balance. Health is about balance. But food is no different. And I think that's why it's very important with our patients when I do this first session to set the base of like a nice habit. And that is why people struggle, is because there's so many different recipes, different diets, because people think about diet as restriction, as not using fat, not using salt, not using sugar, not eating too much fruit because sometimes they're a bit too sweet, or too much red meat as well, or too much of this. And I think it's by restricting someone, you would create more stress in the body as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues with diets, is that idea of that you're depriving yourself in some way, right? And there's this whole thing of restricting, and there's a negative connotation to all of this that I guess both psychologically as well creates an element of, again, coming back to this idea of just being frustrated by not being able to eat the things that you want, rather than eating the things that you want, but in maybe balance. And I think you mentioned a really pertinent point there, which was and I'm not talking about this from a medical point of view as much as I am just kind of anecdotally, and as a chef and as someone who I guess has read quite a bit about food and diet and tried to understand what healthy means. Because I guess as well from even the research that we do with Professor Spence at Oxford University, I'm curious around, what does healthy look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? Are there textures that taste healthier? And you could arguably say, well, how could a texture taste healthier? But I'll give you an example would be, if you take something like crunchy things like celery, cucumber, spinach, greens in general that have that crunchy vibrancy, there's something about that the moment they lose that texture, they seem dull, they seem unappetizing, they don't have that freshness, that healthy texture to them anymore. And, I guess trying to understand, what healthy means, what it looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like. It's hard to get to kind of the bottom of it, but if there's one thing that I can say, it's that it probably doesn't mean restricting and taking out anything from your diet and being kind of subtractive in that way. It would seem that there is genuinely a no one size fits all diet that's going to tick the boxes for everyone, and that what your best strategy in the long term is to adopt a diet that you're going to be able to continue over a long period of time. And generally, when you tend to cut out things like you mentioned, like salt or fats or sugar, those diets aren't sustainable over years and decades. And if they are, maybe those people are just feeling a bit miserable because they're constantly unable. And again, that comes back to that mental well-being part, right? It's not just about being physically fit, it's about mentally being fit as well. And I guess there's always examples of people who are physically really fit, but love to have a burger, or they'd love to just let loose and, enjoy a dessert.
I think being fit is something good, but I've got all type of patients. I've got patients who are very fit, so the diet with them will be different. But I've got patients who had a brain lesion, and these patients need to recover taste, recover flavor, recover pleasure to eat, because some taste and flavors, they can't have them anymore because they don't recognize them or they don't like them anymore. So
tell me a bit more about that. How would that relate to having had a brain lesion? So they may lose the function of being able to perceive flavor and taste through their chemical senses?
basically, depending on where you have your brain lesion, some cortex of your brain, some part of your brain might be affected, because a brain lesion is basically a tiny part of the cortex that the body is trying to heal. And what happens is the immune system is struggling, because often there's like a cancer, what we call lymphoma, and that will change the way the cortex works, because there's an emergency situation around the area and a lot of cells are trying to protect. That means restriction of mobility for people. So sometimes it's the whole part of a limb or even all part of the body is not going to function anymore. And it might affect the taste, flavor, vision, and even hearing, So with this patient, it's essential to bring the diet in the middle, because we know that taste is linked to cortex, that is linked to memory, to the process of like pleasure, of texture. You said about texture. Texture is very important. We have teeth for a reason. They help us to kind of like have this texture, flavor, memory. We remember ingredients because of the texture. And a lot of people don't like sometimes food because of the texture. It's very interesting. And that is happening in the brain, but in the gut as well. So for these people, it's trying to make them understand that a flavor is now not very great because of a lot of different reasons. Yes, the brain lesions, but the treatment as well. Chemotherapy is a big thing. Radiotherapy affects your taste as well. They have this metal, sensation. And trying to push them to eat again properly is not only helping the taste, memory, and flavor, they're changing the way the bodies function. Because often these people had a very hardcore lifestyle. They were stressed all the time, pressure, no time for themselves, no holidays. So they were always in a rush, and at the end they burn out. And the burnout sometimes is nothing. Sometimes it's bad. Sometimes it can be a cancer, it can be a bad condition. So it's a big lesson for them, for their health, but as well for the way they were eating. Because they always say, I never really looked at what I was eating. I was eating a lot of processed food with a lot of conservatives, with a lot of things that I shouldn't eat, but I didn't know at the time. And that's the knowledge. And that's all about education. I'm I'm fully 100% for patient education, because if you understand what is happening to you, you can take the steps
Sure.
because you have the knowledge. I always say, when you are in a situation when you struggle with your health, we think that someone else, the GP, the doctor, the specialist, has a solution for you. But we all have the solution in ourselves.
So you think there's something more intuitive there, that we know how to self-heal?
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mention about different forms of therapy and how they can affect taste, because I remember attending a symposium several years ago that was looking at chemotherapy and the effect that it had on patients' perceptions of flavor and taste. And specifically, as you mentioned, that metallic taste. And the interest there, and part of why I was in attendance, was looking at, because I guess we all think of, the basic taste as being salty, bitter, sour, sweet, and umami being kind of the fifth one that's in there as kind of savoriness. But then there are other taste sensations that people believe should be part of that group, fatty being one of them, and metallic being another. And I think it's interesting because most of us can kind of understand what we mean by metallic, but this becomes obviously a lot more prevalent in, and a lot more of a dominant flavor, or taste, I should say, sensation for those who undergo chemotherapy. And the question was, could you create dishes and foods for patients undergoing such treatment that was sympathetic to that and was able to take that into consideration? And if anything, I'm not saying try and make metallic delicious, but how could you make those foods for patients who, a lot of the time as well, so taste can be lost, smell obviously can be lost. And I guess for anyone watching this who's not familiar, the idea of losing your sense of smell essentially means that you lose a big part of what we call flavor. And that's the same as you can try kind of pinching your nose and biting into an apple, and you don't really get much until you release and you get that aroma in there. And so I guess that is really challenging in terms of understanding, how do you cater for patients who are undergoing and who are suffering from these kind of distortions and augmentations to their perception of taste and flavor. And already when you're sick, I think most of us understand when unwell that there's a reduction in kind of that feelings of hunger and appetite. And so compounded on top of that, having this flavor of metallicness that's coming through in food, that's a real challenge then to make sure that those people are able to get the nutrients, minerals, and vitamins that they need.
Yeah, I think the main challenge is to identify what exactly is giving them this metal kind of taste, because they don't have it all the time. Sometimes they have it with like a specific food or a specific smell, and they will kind of taste the metal. So what I do with my patients is really identify the smell, and then these flavors. So I use different herbs, different vegetables to do that, because some herbs are associated with some meat for people.
Sure.
Depending on their cultural background and everything, I need to know what they used to kind of cook or eat, and then I can really draw a picture, and then we can actually produce recipe. With one of our patients, for example, I used a vinaigrette. There was rapeseed oil, soya sauce, cider vinegar, red wine vinegar, a bit of a mix with lemon juice, and then she was using that all the time on all the dishes that she had, and it brought back a lot of memories, a lot of taste from when she was younger. So it's just by identifying what is the thing to use at a time where people are not appreciating food anymore. And that's really, really important, because pleasure is, for me, in my opinion, the first thing that should happen when you eat. You should really enjoy your food, because when you make something, you appreciate even more because you produce something. But the main thing is, at the end of all this process, is to enjoy your life. And health, diet, sleep, social, everything included needs to be, we can't be perfect, but you need to kind of push all these things to be at least a bit better from what they are now. We can all improve. So
yeah. And so how then do you get people to sustain these diets and to sustain this over a long period of time? I mean, maybe in the beginning, it's fun, it's empowering. You're in the kitchen, you're cooking, and you're maybe discovering that you enjoy cooking, and maybe, it's something that you take on. But then you get busy, life takes over. How do you get people to stick with maintaining a healthy diet?
So, as I said initially, it's all about habits. So, with a patient, I have a follow-up process that is very, very, for me, important. So, I never let them in the nature with a plan, and then you just do your cooking, and then I see you like in 1 year, and we see how you are. There is like a proper process where I always follow up on how they're doing with that. And then if they can't cook, because some of my patients don't have the time to cook, I work with the people who work for them, and then we're trying to set up a nice menu and then trying to see how things could work for them. But then for the people who can cook, I really take the time for each aspect of the process. So each step of the process, we review that. And then we cook again together, and then I show them more. But I don't give all my patients all at once. I give them a tiny bit each session, depending on what they need. Because if you give everything all at once, people will feel overwhelmed.
Sure.
There's a lot, and I think it's good to, as any person going into education, you need to have a bit, understand it properly, and then progress with that, evolve with that, and then not rush anything. Don't try to be a Michelin star chef when you start cooking. Because we live in these kind of times where people can think, oh yeah, I'm going to do this recipe, I'm going to be a Michelin star chef. It's a process, and do it for yourself before you do it to show other, But it's habits, it's priority. If you prioritize your time into the right things, you discover that you have a lot of time.
And so you mentioned diet as being one of the kind of most important aspects of, I guess, when you're looking at people's treatment plans, that diet features heavily into that. You also mentioned sleep.
Yeah.
How is sleep, what's that contributing to the overall picture?
So sleep is the time when we recover during our day. So it's almost the most important time of the day. That's when we recover. Recovery means absorbing all the nutrients, digesting our food, creating memories, because that's the moment where we create all the memories that we live during the last 2 or 3 days. Things overlap. So it's a very active process. We think we are asleep, but we're actually the most active of the day. So if our sleep is good, then we recover well. Then what we eat is even more powerful and has a lot more impact on our body, on our systems, and on ourselves. So you can eat super well, but if you don't sleep, then things will not be that great.
Right, okay.
So that's where
So if you're not getting enough sleep, part of the issue is that you're not allowing your body to extract all the nutrients, minerals, vitamins that it could from the foods that you're ingesting. Okay.
Exactly. And that's why nowadays we have a big problem with sleep, because of all the screens that we have, because of a lot of different things. And we see that in some research that the absorption of some proteins, of some nutrients, they're not as efficient as they used to. And that's because of the change in the microbiome. Microbiome is how the different bacteria in our system, digestive system, are working together, basically. So they are essential because they identify which part of the nutrient we should absorb and then which part we shouldn't, basically. Because the body doesn't really absorb it, it synthesizes. So it's very interesting, because we thought sleep was something that we kind of we couldn't influence, but nowadays we research more and more sleep, and then that's an amazing thing because we understand the behaviors, and then food is a big part of it.
Yeah, I guess there's become so much more of an awareness of this idea of a brain-gut axis, right? And the relationship between what we eat and our ability to synthesize and create neurochemicals that obviously dominate our mood, our feelings, our thoughts, and how we obviously make decisions. So when it comes to maintaining a healthy gut, what is it that you suggest to your patients that they need to be doing?
So
what are good habits around making sure that one maintains a healthy microbiome?
So let's take, for example, someone who's got diabetes. Okay, there's a problem with insulin transformation in the gut. in the pancreas, okay? The pancreas is linked to the liver, and the liver is going to send the energy and then the food to the brain, basically. The liver feeds the brain, so it's super important. So with this kind of patient, I make sure that they have enough proteins, not too much sugar, obviously, enough vegetables, and enough, enough water as well. Like good drinking is very, very important. So, for example, let's make it simple. Fasting is a very good tool to create a sensation in the body that is in need of absorption. That's why fasting is amazing. That's why sometimes we do it over a week, over 2 weeks, over 3 weeks. It's a good reset for the body to, reorganize and then push the liver to produce a bit more energy on its own because it's got the potential to do it. And then we can actually go and then have a nice meal. So then everything can be absorbed properly. But see, if you overlap too many meals on top of each other, you create irritation. So that's why the review on breakfast, is quite important at the moment. Is that really essential to have a breakfast? Yes and no, depending on your lifestyle. But when you wake up in the morning, in Chinese medicine, we always say, don't aggress your body because your body just came out from a massive cleanup. It's like sleep is closing the shop. We reorganize everything. We make sure that when we reopen, things are going to be nice and tidy and they look good. So in the morning, what you don't want is 1,000 people coming to the shop, destroying the shop, and then going away. That's what is the equivalent of a breakfast when you wake up at 6 in the morning, or when you have a coffee straight away after you wake up. It's panic for the body. It's irritation.
Well, I guess it's gone from standby mode straight into kind of having to digest food and that your organs are having to kind of take on, I guess, depending on how heavy the breakfast is as well. But I've never been a breakfast eater. And I do think that there's something about that I've intuitively felt. I mean, I don't consider myself to be someone who intermittently fasts. It's only become a term in my kind of lexicon in the last 5 years or something. But I've always naturally, I guess, intermittently fasted. My first meal will typically, or my first bite, I wouldn't even say meal, might be at around 10, 11 o'clock. Probably wouldn't have my first meal till around 1, 2 o'clock. And then I guess I'm kind of conscious of not eating too late into the night as well. So, and that seems to be something that I've kind of done intuitively. But it seems that I've read a decent amount of research to suggest that there is something about intermittent fasting that does seem to work for the body. And I think I kind of do it without thinking. But I guess it is kind of a positive potential habit for people to pick up.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a very important part of the process of being what we call healthy. But, when you had so many years of your life where you used to eat like a breakfast and all of that, if you change this habit all at once, you create more problem as well. So it's all about doing all this change in a smooth way. It's like coming from a normal diet and becoming vegan. Some of my patients, it took us 3 years to actually transition from like being normal to vegan because the body needs a lot of time to transfer this diet from a vegan diet. Because obviously, as you said, it's very difficult for body to imagine that you can sustain the same kind of diet for more than 2-3 years sometimes. They often give up very quickly because it's too difficult, it's too restrictive, and they haven't had the organization done properly. And I think that's the key, is trying to do things a bit more slower. We talk about slow food, and I think that's where we should go is, if we try...
I guess the challenge is that people are living in a fast time. So slow food is, although that's something that I think a lot of people can understand, that they can appreciate the merits of, I guess, living it out and the actual day-to-day practicalities of trying to keep up with that. And that's the issue that I think I see for a lot of people on a vegan diet. It's not that there's anything wrong with being on a vegan diet or that you can't get all the nutrients, minerals, vitamins that you may need from a vegan diet. But what are the chances that you're cooking foods that really contain all the nutrients, minerals, and vitamins that you need? And if you look at a lot of the plant-based foods, convenience foods that are out there, the point is that they're heavily, heavily, heavily processed. And everyone knows this. And the point is, that's not healthy for you. So I get why people maybe from a moral perspective, if you say, well, I'm vegan because of cruelty to animals and just generally I don't want to be consuming animal flesh or animal products, I can completely appreciate that. I guess the point though is that then you have to take on the responsibility of eating a diet that really does compensate for that lack of animal fats and proteins and nutrients, minerals, vitamins that you're missing from your diet. And really the only way that you're going to be able to do that is through eating home cooked meals using a really wide variety of ingredients. And I think it's Dr. Tim Spector in his book Spoon-Fed, where he talks about, I think the magic number is about 30 whole foods, which is actually isn't that difficult in a week. If you consider 7 days, 2 to 3 meals a day, 30 ingredients isn't so difficult. But that's actually quite challenging for a lot of people, because if you look at their diets, it's actually quite narrow what they eat. And that's partially because what we were saying earlier, which is they can't cook, so they don't really know how to cook a celeriac or an aubergine or a courgette. Maybe they know what these ingredients are and they'll eat them as part of meals in restaurants, but to actually come cook this at home, well, they don't really know how to cook these ingredients. And so they end up with this very kind of narrow diet of foods that they're familiar with, that they know that they can cook, that they're comfortable with cooking, that are cost effective, time effective. And I guess that's really a huge part of that challenge.
It's very, really interesting, I think, is because, as you said, being vegan, you want to respect nature. There is like an intention. It's amazing. It's great. But when you look at how processed food are produced, how these seeds are grown, in what kind of fields, and how it affects nature, and how we cut a lot of forests for that as well, and we impact nature. So where is the limit between vegan and between non-vegan, and then how these both diets respect nature? If you take someone that is not vegan, eating small farmers meat only, very rarely as well, like once or twice a week, once a month red meat, having only small producer food, your impact on nature is maybe smaller than someone that is vegan who is eating processed food from supermarkets.
Yeah, I guess there's been a lot of bad press around things like almond milk, avocados, quinoa, and I guess from both a social, economic, and environmental perspective, that the impact that these poster child ingredients of veganism, unfortunately, are unsustainable in a whole different set of criteria, right, than the ones that maybe as a vegan morally that you're looking at in terms of what would drive you to be vegan. And maybe the kind of foods then that are made highly accessible and affordable and mass processed are devoid in nutrients because they're highly processed, and are using ingredients that are not necessarily sustainable from an environmental perspective. And yeah, I mean, that's a really tough one. And again, as I said, I think the way to go vegan, if there is anyone out there looking to become vegan, is really to learn how to cook very simple and delicious foods, but from scratch. And to really, I think you need to educate yourself a little bit in terms of figuring out how to get the right nutrients, minerals, and vitamins that you need out of plant-based foods that are so readily available in animal-based products. And that doesn't mean that animal-based products are necessarily superior, but it just means that if you are going to make that shift to being vegan, that you just need to put that time and effort in there. Because I think if you just go into eating a vegan diet, essentially shopping in the same way that you would from the same kind of supermarkets that you would, you're not going to end up with a healthy physical and mental positive place.
I think it's more about, as you said, like the education. If you know what you're doing, you're going to do the right thing for you, and it's all about knowing what to do as well. So it's very tricky because we have all these organic, non-organic foods. Organic doesn't mean necessarily it's better neither, because, there's a lot of pesticides that are used in mass production, organic food that are more dangerous than the normal pesticides. So it's about education. If you know what to do and then how to do it with the right people, because you can't just think, okay, I'm going to try to educate myself and then read a lot of books and then I'm going to be the best. I think it's good to have a chat with someone who is knowledgeable. It can help you, assist you, guidance. It's good to be guided sometimes. It's good to be assisted into your quest of becoming healthy, mentally, physically. But overall, as I said, trying to improve your life. We have only one life. That's a very common thing that everyone says. But when you are in healthcare, you realize that even more with patients who almost died, or patients who are, have cancer and all of that. If you make the right choices, not all the time, because we can't, but if you overall make the right choices, there is a good chance that your life can be comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself mentioning this a lot, and I've probably mentioned it in quite a few podcasts in the past, but there's this whole notion of food as medicine. And I guess I don't necessarily agree with that literally, because if you're really, really sick, nothing is going to help as much as medicine. There's no chicken soup, there's no, I don't know, olive oil and honey tincture that you can make that is going to reduce the pain and help with treating the ailment in as effective a way as medicine is going to do. But I do believe that diet and leading a health, and by diet I don't mean kind of compromise and restrictive diet, I mean a balanced diet in the long-term period, over a sustained period of time, is the best insurance that you can have against getting sick in the first place. And I think to some degree, I think rather than looking at health in relation to food, I think a lot of people think about calorie restrictions, they think about compromise, and they think about removing certain elements from their diet. I think the problem with that is, as we said, it never ends up being kind of sustainable and long term. I think if people could shift the paradigm and the way of thinking about it and thinking, well, no, managing my diet isn't actually about restricting and cutting things out. Managing my diet is about finding a long-term strategy to eat a balanced level of foods, and that includes whole foods, fermented foods, and fermented foods, we're talking about sourdough or cheese, or, it doesn't have to be kimchi and sauerkraut, but, making sure that there's enough fiber in your diet. But it's not about kind of going to extremes. It's really about finding that middle ground and learning what works for you as an individual as well, right?
I think what you mentioned about people not knowing is a very interesting thing, because when you don't know, you're lost. So you do a lot of things to try to compensate. But I think people are already restricting themselves when in their diets, because as you said, like they use only a few ingredients. And I think is when they come from this thing of like diet is not a restriction, is actually an opening of my sense, because I'm going to discover a lot of different things.
Agreed. I actually think that is, when the whole kind of thing of we, as human beings, loss aversion, the fact that we don't like losing out on things. So even the term weight loss, you're probably better off using terms like health gain than weight loss, right? As a motivator, as a driver, as a goal for yourself, right? And I think dieting has always been promoted as being about compromise and restriction. But actually, imagine if you were to think about diet as being, actually going on a diet means I'm going to have to eat all these other foods that I've never eaten before. And I'm going to have to try all these other ingredients that I've never ventured to cook before. Well, that then opens it up to being a lot more exciting and interesting as a prospect, and much more of an adventure in terms of, let's see what my new ingredient of the week is going to be. And just by including one new ingredient each week into, or just every time you're at the supermarket, picking up one thing that you maybe normally wouldn't pick up, and trying to incorporate that into, and, in a day and age where a simple Google search will tell you how to cook celeriac, or how to cook leeks, or how to cook, I don't know, aubergine, or some of these ingredients that for me, I take for granted as a chef that these are just really easy to cook with. Like, how do you cook an aubergine? Well, it's really easy. You just slice it in half. If you want, you can salt it just to take out some of the bitterness and the liquid, and then just toss it in a pan, fry it with whatever you normally would. And it's actually really simple. But for a lot of people, just because they're unfamiliar with the ingredient, then that really puts them off ever even trying, because they don't want to mess it up. And because they don't have the time to mess it up, and they've got themselves to feed and maybe other people at home to feed as well. So, and will the kids like aubergine and blah, blah, blah. So there's lots that people have to take into consideration. But I think, especially even thinking about it, if you have kids and if you have family as well that you're feeding, that's probably the best thing that you could do for them, which is every week or every fortnight, try and introduce a new ingredient or two that none of you are familiar with. And maybe that's a great activity as well.
I think it's an amazing activity, and I think I'm really pushing families to do that together because I think it's a hobby. I think we should see it as a hobby. It is something very, very interesting. To discover new ingredients, to discover new culture. When people travel, you discover new like diets.
It's one of the best parts of traveling is getting to see,
food.
is getting to see how, I love when in a new country going to a breakfast place. I loved discovering what local breakfasts are like. And I'm not a breakfast eater, but I just like seeing what the foods are, what the rituals are. And same for lunch, dinner. But it's fascinating when you go into other countries. And like for me, probably, I mean, I've been very lucky. I've gotten to travel so many parts of the world, but probably one of the most impactful, aside from Japan, would have been Mexico. And I'm not a big breakfast eater, but I loved Mexican breakfasts. And it just really appealed to me. And being over in Mexico, we got to try so many different ingredients that we'd never tried before. And it was such an education. It was incredible. And I just think that if people looked at maybe diet in that way as an opportunity and a kind of call to adventure, that they might find that there's more longevity and sustainability out of it.
Yeah, and I think it's a general thing. If you are curious, you're going to discover the world, the sustainable aspect of it. Being sustainable means, okay, we need to do it long term, guys, because sustainability is not about saving the planet. The planet's going to be here after us. It was there before. It's about saving ourselves, this thin layer that we live on, and discovering all the good things that we have on it. So, and including all the different cultures, as you said, like when you go in Mexico, amazing breakfast. When you go in Italy, amazing pizza, pasta, amazing, very complex dish as well that you wouldn't find anywhere else. But what my point is with my patient, I'm trying to tell them all of these diets are amazing because they are local, because people eat local, because they eat their own food. So when you are in UK, trying to eat your own food as much as you can we have the same impact as what they do.
Yeah, I mean, there is a notion, isn't there, that I guess the season and the earth provides what you need for that season. I agree with that in principle. I guess my only concern is that given the way that a lot of produce is grown these days, are you getting the full amount of nutrients, minerals, and vitamins from these ingredients, given the growing process? And that's the concern. And that's where you end up, I think, with a lot of people ending up taking supplements and things like that or that people have deficiencies in certain parts of their diet. And it's just because, are we growing food that is nutritious enough to start with?
I mean, in a mass production aspect, not really anymore, because we changed the way these species, varieties of vegetables were. We still have, in a small production, these nutrients coming from proper vegetables. And that's why I push people to go away sometimes from supermarkets, when they can.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, what they provide to us, it's standardized. It's always the same thing. It looks always the same. And it's good to see something else, to taste something else, because you can compare. And even in terms of sensation, of sense, it will give you more than just a normal tomato that is not even in season, coming from like a factory, not even a field. So it's very simple in a way. It's very complicated because we live in this world where everything is easy. We go to a supermarket, you get that, but that is our problem as well. And I think, as you said,
we need to work a little bit harder for our food.
Exactly. You need to deserve it.
Well, we have throughout history, right? So
We did.
traveling a half hour on a bus to go pick up some fresh fruit and veg shouldn't be too big of an ordeal.
No, that's what I think. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, now you've inspired me to want to go and find my local. Well, we're very lucky, actually. Where I live, we have a market that opens every Wednesday and Saturday, and you have wonderful fresh baked bread. You have the fishmonger. You have obviously fruit and veg. And you even have a few different stalls that'll sell things like cheeses and a few kind of artisanal products like that. So I guess in every area, you can, if you want, find a market and I guess make the best use of it. Well, you've definitely inspired me to do that.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, I work, I work with them in a way, with all these small producers in my markets where I go, because I push my patients to go to buy their products. When they're like, yeah, but where should I go? I say, oh, you have a market behind your street. A lot of people are nowhere.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I think it's our role as well as healthcare professional, not only to provide treatment, to provide advice, exercise, whatever. We need to help people organize their life as well sometimes, to provide them some tips, to give them some little things that they can use. And that will make a big difference, I think in people's life, just trying to be a bit more human than just being more medical. That's what I'm trying to do as well. Before being a health professional, I'm a human being. As everyone, we make mistakes, we do things wrong, we do things right. But as I said, the real question is, what is the end? What are you going to do with your body? And then how are you going to use this nice new health in your life? Because as you said, we can't fix everything with food. There's a lot of things that we can do. Prevention is, for me, the cure more and more. We shouldn't wait for things to get worse before we treat them. And I've seen so many cases where it went too far and people are out of hope, they can't see future that much. And it's tough to see because there's so many resources on the side to use to actually shift this mindset, shift this way to do, shift these habits, and actually get on a very enjoyable life. Because it's possible still nowadays. Like, we can use a lot of good things in our life, and then including food, to make ourselves a lot more balanced and a lot more consistent.
I guess a big part of it's prioritizing, right? And I think that is probably at the crux of all of this, which is if you prioritize your health. And actually, I don't know if you know the author of Energize, Simon Alexander Ong, who's also part of the Founders Club. And I think in his book, he talks about stop treating your health as a side hustle. And I think that really is at the core of it, that if you prioritize your mental and physical well-being, then you will find the time to sleep. And maybe even not have to go out of your way, but you will go out of your way to go and source your produce from the right kind of places. You will, and you may have, not every day is going to be perfect, but the point is the general approach that you take has to be in some ways that you prioritize your mental and physical well-being. And I guess the idea behind that is if you prioritize that and you optimize that, and you as a machine are operating at, let's not say 100%, but let's say, you're operating at 85, 90% of your capacity, that will have a knock-on effect in everything else in your life and will have a positive kind of impact on it. Whereas I guess if you are like myself, where maybe you prioritize work over your health and mental and physical well-being, that are you ever really operating at kind of that 85, 90% of what you could be doing? And could you not do so much more were you to have that focus? But it's hard because I guess it's costly to prioritize health in terms of time, even money. If you think of, if you want to be eating these kind of whole foods, cooking from scratch and doing all of this, unfortunately, in today's day and age, it's probably cheaper to go to Iceland and pick up a pack of, fried chicken than it is to go and buy a whole chicken and roast it. And I guess that depends. Maybe if you're feeding a family, there's economies of scale to be had, and depends on where you're purchasing the ingredients from. But I think that it really does come down to what we prioritize.
Yeah, I think it's the investment that you put in your health as well, because if you eat something that is cheap, then you might save some money on the side for the moment, but in the future you might have issues, So it's about priority. It's a priority because when we have sometimes massive days of work, we still find the time to go to work out at the end of the day. And it's not a great idea neither, because when you're tired, going to massive workouts
Yeah.
might not do any kind of good for yourself. You might just go in your kitchen and then try to cook a bit, you know?
I just think get in the gym whenever you can. I will go at any time. I go at 5 in the morning, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'll go at any time. I think for me, it's just get it in there while you can.
Yeah, I know.
So for those who have been inspired by your work, Arthur, where can they find out more about what you do?
So I've got my website at the moment that you can see. So
Which is?
larocherougehealth.com. Very simple. I'm based in Kensington. I'm going to start doing some podcasts as well on social media, because what you're doing is very interesting and that really inspired me as well. And yeah, I think for the moment that's where you can find me. And I'm willing to really like develop and scale more things to make sure that people can access all these kind of nice values, principles for health. And I'm going to organize retreats as well, where I want people to go through a whole experience.
Oh, wonderful.
So coming to my hometown in south of France, you know,
Wow.
to discover local producers, but as well like a way of living, and then trying to...
That's wonderful. That's a great way of immersing people, I guess, into having an understanding of lifestyle change, right? Because it's one thing to come visit you here in London and in the hustle and bustle of everything that we're doing, and have a 3-hour session, and you can fill my mind with all these wonderful things that I could be doing, should be doing, must do. And it's a completely different thing to kind of get away into a different environment, even just that mental break and space that you have by being in an unfamiliar place opens you up as well to that curiosity, to that learning. And I think there's something about investing the time and money in doing an activity like that that leaves a more longer term beneficial effect on people. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I hope people can find their way in a balanced life. That's what I want. And if we have to use different ways, different methods to do it and to make them enjoy that, then I'm for it, because I want to enjoy it as well.
So, Arthur, when we have certain guests come on the show, I like to try and think about how their work can kind of be summed up, or what it would look like as a dish.
Yeah.
And I work on creating these dishes using generative AI, and this is a gift for you. This is a dish that's inspired by your work. So what we've got there is a selection of over 30 ingredients, because this whole idea of diversity in your diet, and there's all whole foods. So we wanted to do this is basically a gift for you. This is our representation of your work in a plate.
That's amazing. It looks like a flower, and I love flowers. I'm a big fan. It's a very nice little bunch of
Well, it
colors.
has to look visually appealing, right? The
Of
food
course.
has to look great, taste great, smell great, and contain, in this case, a wide variety of nutrients, minerals, and vitamins.
And I love the chili. It's be spicy.
Yeah, well, you need that balance of flavors there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Arthur, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.